started. Thanks, Wendy. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Fancher. I'm the chair of the interim board for the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, and we're going to call the meeting to order September 19th. It's 1:04 p.m. I think I'd like to just start by saying welcome to our prospective permanent board members that have joined the meeting. I'm not sure if we're prepared to go around and do any kind of introductions today, but thank you very much for joining this meeting and any subsequent meetings before the permanent board takes effect in January. Jim, did you want to add anything there?
I would just say thank you for your interest and good luck with your either election campaign or application with the governor, and really grateful for your willingness to consider service on the board, and thanks to all the interim board members for the time and effort they have contributed as well. And for those of you who are on the interim board and are considering continuing your service, extra gratitude.
Well, let's go ahead and do roll call.
Could I ask a question?
Sure,
I know we're
Helen.
we're hard pressed for time, but if there's potential board members, if we gave them like a minute to say why they're interested in serving, since I think a lot of them, the names I didn't recognize as anybody ever being associated with the board or attending meetings. But if that's impossible, then maybe they can send us some kind of information of why they're interested in serving on the board, because I'd like to keep my neighbors informed.
Yeah, we'll hold that for maybe at the end of the agenda, but that's a good request, Mary Helen. Thank you. Let's go ahead and do roll call for the meeting. I'm sorry, I should have started with that.
Nancy Hendrickson. Here. Eric Mueller.
Here.
Dave Ritma.
Here.
Seth Reeser.
Here.
Councillor Simpson is away. Lori Stegman. Emerald Bogue.
Here.
Corky Kohler indicated is not available today. Rochelle Altman.
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid.
Here.
No, you're here. Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
Eric Molander.
Here.
Jason Dumont.
Here.
Ed Washington. Do not see Ed. Bob Salinger.
Here.
Heather King, I believe, indicated is not available. We have 11 board members present.
Thanks, Wendy. Okay. First order of business, we have minutes from the May and June meetings. These are starting on page 22 of your board packet. Hopefully you've had a chance to review. And as Jim mentioned earlier, we had an amendment that we'd like to add a memo from Eric Molander into the minutes. Were there any other changes that anybody noticed that they'd like reflected?
Just to provide some additional context, Mr. Molander back in June had prepared a thoughtful memo about the debt distribution matter that you guys discussed in June. And he had requested at the time that be included in the minutes, and I neglected to do that. And Eric was kind enough to remind me. And so that memo, staff requests that you approve the minutes of the June 7th meeting with Mr. Molander's memo attached to that. And Eric, thank you for reminding me, and regrets again for not recalling I needed to do that.
With that, Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the minutes as submitted and including Mr. Molander's memo as mentioned.
Thank you, Eric. We have a motion by Eric. Do we have a second?
Second.
I second that.
Oh, Tanny beat you to it, Eric. So I've got a motion from Eric Mueller, a second by Tanny Stephenson to approve the minutes as included in the board and amended as stated. And all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
I'm assuming, so that was Nancy. I think she was delayed. Nancy, was your aye for approve?
Yeah, sorry, having a little internet spottiness here, but yes, approve. Thanks.
Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay. Next order of business, we've got Emily Robertson, who's going to talk about Resolution 2024-09-01, adopting a board compensation policy. Emily?
Hi, so I'm Emily Robertson. I'm the Policy and Administration Manager for the district. And as Steve mentioned, I have for your consideration this a resolution approving a board compensation policy. As was mentioned in the memo, this is considered best practices for a variety of reasons, can help us kind of attract and retain quality board members, lower barriers to board service, and then sort of help support a sense of accountability and professionalism for our board. And so the Oregon revised statutes do limit special district board members to compensation of $50 a day for board service. So that's what we've included here. And this was included in your approved budget for this year. It isn't explicitly stated in the materials, but internally we had planned to just roll this out with the new board in January. And I did develop this in consultation with a handful of other special districts in the area that have a similar policy. Clackamas River Water, Rockwood Water District, Tualatin Valley Water, Tualatin Hills Parks and Rec, many other special districts in the region have a similar policy. Eric, sorry.
Yes, will this also include out-of-pocket expenses for board members? Travel, office expense associated with printing out a 327-page, I'm kidding, board packet.
This does not necessarily, we can always, we have budget for that stuff. So if you need something printed, we can do that for you. We can provide kind of basic office supplies that are needed from the district.
Emily, I noticed you didn't mention it, but $50 per day for work, but capped at 8 days a month. So capped at $400 per month.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Emily, could you describe what your thinking is about what qualifies for that compensation? Because we had some internal discussions about that.
We did. This policy includes participation in official meetings. And so I think just consideration of the needs for financial controls and sort of documentation and accountability, I think we can, we're planning to start with just the days that you're in an official meeting or a subcommittee meeting to be compensated.
Any other questions for Emily? Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I'm just curious, does the compensation have to go to the individual, or for those of us that are kind of doing it as part of our work as well, part of our work day, can it go to the business instead?
You know, I'd have to take a look. I would assume that anything has to fly through ethics laws. This is designed to be for the individual, and if you wouldn't qualify because we're doing it through your workplace organization or you work at a public agency, that's something that I think each individual will have to determine through like ethics laws in consultation with their employer. But no, that wasn't contemplated, and I'm not sure how that would work, Bob.
Okay, thanks.
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I had read through this and I guess I had understood it to try and be able to lower some barriers for people that might want to be able to participate, but might be a single parent who needs to have a babysitter in order to attend the meeting, and we don't want to exclude folks that want to participate and have to pay out of pocket in order to actually participate. All of that makes sense to me. I guess the one piece that I'm not entirely comfortable with, and I think Emily alluded to it earlier, was that I guess I'd be more comfortable in adopting the resolution if, like in the last sentence, it said, whereas it said this policy attached to this resolution as Exhibit A, if it said, which will become effective January 1st, 2025. I'm just a little uncomfortable about voting for it because then it would be in theory applicable to us for the remainder of the year. And we've been doing this for several years as we have been doing it. And I'm that's just my comment. I'm a little queasy about it without that effective date.
So essentially, you're proposing a friendly amendment to this resolution that we'll consider here shortly after discussion. Thanks, Eric, and I agree with you there. Mary
And
Helen.
Mr. Mueller, that's consistent with our intent, so I appreciate you catching that. Thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have the same issue that Eric has because some of the people on this board have served for 12 years and we've gotten free lunches but never been compensated. And so to be able to make that jump to $400 or a limit of $400 a month, I think would make it clear that there are two separate things, that this is a newly elected board and this is their new policy. I also feel uncomfortable because I've served on, and maybe Emerald can help me out on this as far as port policy, but I've served on there are several Port of Portland committees, and we've received stipends for service, and $400 a month is, I think, a large amount of money. I've served on Bureau advisory budget committees for city bureaus and for state revenue boards. So I would suggest that $400 amount maybe increase the $50 per day stipend and limit and not have a limit. Just say, if you attend a meeting, you get $100. And that's what I get serving on the current Port 2045 committee, but maybe Emerald can make that more clear and eloquent than I did.
The only thing I would say, Mary Helen, is that the $50 is limited by statute as a special district. That's the maximum we can provide for a day of service for board members. So that is limited there.
So we could say $50 for X amount of hours, or does it have to say per day?
It's for a day of it just is a day that you've provided service to the board. I can find the exact statutory language, but it's for a day that you've worked and served at a meeting. If you've attended an official meeting or a subcommittee meeting, you can are eligible for $50 stipend.
So we could say $50 a day, limit $100,
No.
something like that. No, okay.
And really, the only limit is it's based on your budget. We budgeted for $400 a month for each board member, and so this doesn't. That's really where the only limit came in. But for official board meetings only, I would, and subcommittee meetings, I would imagine there's likely to be less than 8 per month.
Steph, go ahead.
Yeah, following up on Eric's question, if this, tell me why what the idea of bringing this now rather than, if it doesn't affect us and is just going to affect the new board, why not have the new board vote on it and approve it once they're installed?
I think that we've been using this as part of our recruiting to let them know that like we were bringing a compensation policy. I think it's it's good practice ethically for it to be you all to be adopting something that does not apply to you rather than asking them in their first meeting to approve for them to be paid. I think that shows some good faith and transparency. And I think that really was the motivation for the timing on this, as just one of your last duties to get them set up so that they could hit the ground running there in January with this.
Emerald?
Hi there, just responding to Mary Helen. Hi, Mary Helen. Yes, we do have a community stipend policy. It's pretty standard form, and this is pretty consistent with it. I was just looking it up, refreshing my own memory on it, and it's 100 or 150 a day. So I'm happy to circulate it, but it's very consistent here. I support this. It's a best practice, and these are very reasonable numbers. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rochelle.
Yes, quick comment. Section A of the exhibit seems to be worded more narrowly than the intent as described in the background materials. And so I would just love to, I think it's a question for Allison Keene, just whether she views Section A as written as being an exhaustive list of eligible items that can be compensated, or if it needs to be brought in to reflect what was in the staff recommendation. I'm thinking of language around time spent on preparation for board meetings. I don't see that clearly reflected in Section A, and I know some members do spend a fair amount of time preparing for meetings. And so just wanting that intent to be sufficiently clear in the exhibit.
And Rochelle, just from my perspective, we had discussed allowing compensation for preparatory time, but we discussed the challenge of having accurate controls. And so we thought official meetings would allow more clear documentation. So that was the intent. And if that language needs to be clarified, or the board would prefer to also allow compensation for preparatory time, I'm sure we can find a way to accommodate that and still obtain adequate documentation.
Okay, so I'll just note that as the board packet is worded right now in the background section, it says approval of resolution, will allow board members to be compensated $50 each day for work they perform related to their duties as board members, such as attending or preparing for board meetings. So perhaps just to have the intent that's in the board packet, I'm not sure if we can have make sure that
what's in
kind of legislative history surrounding the resolution.
Yeah, I think that was I neglected to make some of the final edits after our internal discussion. What's in Exhibit A is what we intended to be the recommendation.
Go ahead, Allison.
Thanks. I'm not on camera because my computer is spotty. I think, Rochelle, that's a great point. And Emily, I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it's best practices to compensate for attendance, but not for preparation, because it is too hard to police that. I know at the Ethics Commission, we were compensated $50 for the one meeting we would go to, but not for the numerous hours we would spend on the 500-page packets that we would get. So I think that the way Exhibit A is written is great, and you could probably revise a staff memo just to remove that one statement, and you'll be fine.
Thanks, Allison. Mary Helen, then I'm gonna make my own comments.
Okay, I'll be quick. Allison cleared up most of that, and I'm glad that Rachel brought that up about attending a meeting as opposed to preparation, because I'm probably one of the outliers that spends more time preparing because it takes me more time, because I'm not a financial wizard. And when we get these meeting packets with financial information, I'm going to take a lot more time because of my lack of accounting skills. And in preparation, would I get paid because neighbors are asking me questions and I have to explain to them? So that wording change is very important to me to be able to support this resolution.
Thank you, Mary Helen. I just want to echo what I heard from Emerald. I think this is very reasonable. This is a modest amount. I actually feel, and it illustrates how difficult it is for a sitting board to do something like this for their own members. I feel bad that those of you that have served so many years, Mary Helen and others that aren't already compensated by a home organization, that you haven't been getting kind of more compensation for your time. But again, for this board to kind of vote compensation in for ourselves, it's a politically challenging thing to do. And just from an ethics standpoint, hard to bring that forward, but very supportive of this. I think it's the right thing to do. I think, again, the amount is modest. The work that this new board is going to do is extremely important for the region. So this is, to me, this is something I'm going to support wholeheartedly. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Rochelle, do you still have another comment, or is your hand still up?
No, sorry about that. I'll lower it.
Go ahead, Eric.
Well, with that, Mr. Chair, I would move to amend the resolution on page 24 of the packet, just to add to the end of the sentence after it says attached to this resolution as Exhibit A, to add to be effective January 1st, 2025.
Thank you,
I
Eric.
second that.
So we have a motion by Eric Mueller to approve as amended, as stated with the amendment. We have a second by Eric Molander to do the same. Any discussion on this motion? I'm not hearing any. Let's just do a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Emily.
And now, excuse me, now you wanna. That was a vote on the motion to amend, and now you'll vote on the main underlying motion, which is to move the resolution as amended.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, I would move adoption of resolution 2024-0901, approving a board compensation policy as amended.
Thank you, Eric. We have a motion by Eric Mueller. Do I have a second?
I second.
Jason, did you, so we have a motion by Eric Mueller, second by Jason Dumont to approve this resolution as amended. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, next order of business, we have Lori Baker to talk about the bond issuance update. Lori, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see the screen? Perfect. So good afternoon to our existing board members and our potential new board members. In June of 2024, the board authorized issuance of the first tranche of our general obligation bond debt of $15.73 million. The authorization had a limit on the interest rate of the issuance to a maximum of 7.5%. So today I'm just going to walk you through the results of that issuance. Oops, went too far. So we worked with our financial advisors and the bond council to complete the bid process for our private bank offering of the first tranche of the general obligation borrowing. We received 4 bids with interest rates between 5.15% and 6.67%. The terms offered were between 10 and 15 years. And we selected the lowest interest rate offering, which also had the best borrowing terms. And I'll just stop for a second. I know that we're all aware that the feds just decreased the interest rate by 0.5 percentage point just a couple of days ago. We closed on this a couple of days ago on the 17th. I had a conversation with our financial advisors in July, and I said, hey, it's looking to me, given the economics of our situation right now and things that are going on, that we're going to see a rate decrease in September. And can you please tell me whether this is something that we should wait for and hold off on this borrowing until the banks have had an opportunity to consider that rate decline? The response that I received from our financial advisors was, what we're seeing in the offerings that we've done recently is that the rates already have declined and are reflective of the bank's anticipation of that decrease. I will say that we are issuing a taxable borrowing here. This is not tax exempt. So if you were to compare this to the Fed rate or to a tax exempt borrowing that government is issuing at this time, it would be about 3.7% in interest. The reason that we had to do a taxable borrowing right now was that we have some pretty substantial real estate transactions that we're looking at in the next year or so. And a good portion of those may not actually be eligible for tax exempt borrowing. So our bond counsel recommended that we do this first tranche as a taxable borrowing to allow us that ability to use those funds for all of the real estate transactions that we are looking to complete in the next couple of years. I'll also remind you that we have also been negotiating with the state of Oregon for a borrowing, and we're still working with them on the terms. The terms were a little bit different than we anticipated, so we've had a couple of meetings so far, and hope to be coming to you with authorization for that issuance in the next couple of months, but we want to work through and make sure that we've got the terms aligning to what we anticipated. That borrowing, which will be $15 million, will be tax exempt. So you'll see rates that look a little bit different there. And Eric, I see your hand, but I'm going to go to my last slide and then I'll take questions. So we did close our borrowing with Webster Bank this week on September 17th. The money is in the bank and ready to go for us as we move forward with our activity on the general obligation projects. This is taxable borrowing with the interest rate of 5.15%. And we have a 15-year repayment term. It is callable in whole beginning June 15th of 2029. That means if the interest rates go down, we have the ability to refinance this at the face value of the debt beginning in 2029. We have some terms to allow us to do that earlier. Because this is a taxable borrowing, we can do an advance refunding to refinance this borrowing at any time. So we don't have limitations on that. So we can take a look at that when we do the next tranche of borrowing, which we're looking at a public offering probably in 2 to 3 years. So we will be keeping an eye on this. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're not burdening our taxpayers, but the advice that we've received from our financial advisors is that we got a good result from this bid process. We got some good flexibility from the bank, and they felt very positively about the close. With that, I can take questions.
Thanks, Lori. Go ahead, Eric.
Lori, I'm still confused about closing the day before the FOMC meeting. And who was your financial advisor again?
Carol Samuels, and she has come and talked to you all before in the past. And actually,
is she online?
The borrowing was, and the offers were actually a couple weeks prior. So the timing of the signing of the documents and the close of the debt is about a couple weeks after you agree to the terms on the debt.
Right. And so why didn't you just wait until you saw what the Fed was going to do? It's 2 weeks, and instead of a quarter point, it was half a point. And what occurred is that the guys in Connecticut, Webster Bank, ended up with, in effect, a windfall because of that. And I'm just curious as to why they were pushing to have it before the FOMC.
Sorry, Lori, if I may, just the way I interpreted what she said, correct me if I'm wrong, is the banks had already essentially priced the action in as stocks priced, certain anticipated actions in. So the advice from the financial advisor is that we're not, even if we go out today, we're not likely to get much better than what we got. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was the advice of the advisors. And when we calculate what this would have looked like at a tax exempt rate, it's pretty much aligning to what we're seeing now. The Fed rates are at 3.7.
Right. And so I look at that as about 3.4, but let's think about really what was occurring then. Her advice was from July. And at that point, we were looking at a quarter point. And yesterday, after the FOMC announcement, yields declined by 0.37. So it was clear that the market had not fully anticipated a 0.5 point move. So, I know that the bank is going to tell you whatever they're going to tell you, but the broader market was clear that they were only looking for about a 0.25 point move. And in this instance, knowing that the Fed was likely to make a move on the market, it's just curious to me why you didn't wait a couple of days to finish everything off.
Because
I
we were
know
locked
in
into the
the deals
rates
that
at
I've
the
done
point that the
with
best
Citibank and
was received.
other banks, I beg your pardon, go ahead.
We were locked into the rates 2 weeks ago. So we would have started.
So you actually weren't locked into them
Yes,
because you can always renegotiate it.
Mr. Chair, I just want to
This is one of those things in which if you know that there's an event that would likely impact the rate that we pay and that our ratepayers pay, why wouldn't you just delay it until after the FOMC?
We would have started over. And we need the funds.
Why do you say you would have started over?
Because
I'm
the
curious.
bid process locked in the rates, so we would have had to start the bid process over at this point. And it took us about 2 months to get through that process.
Right. Would you ever allow them to amend their bid?
Eric, are you suggesting an action or that we I mean, I think what you're getting at is it doesn't make sense to pull this and start over. And I think that the answer has been given no, but so I need to ask the board, I guess, if we want to pursue that line or not.
So what we're faced with here is that the continuation of this is that we're going to be locked into a high rate of 5.15%, at least through 2029. During that time, as we heard yesterday, the Fed is highly likely to continue to reduce the Fed funds rate, which has a ladder effect. It's going to reduce all the other ones in lockstep. And I think that in this instance, we'd be wise to look for other ways to work with Webster Bank out of Connecticut to find an appropriate mechanism. This is a suggestion for staff action, not necessarily for board action, Steve. Steve, we've already approved that they work within those parameters. They seem to be pretty high relative to current market conditions. And I'm just asking for staff to look at potential alternatives where Webster Bank and their Connecticut friends would be willing to think about renegotiated terms or equivalent.
It's a fair question. Thanks, Eric. I think that's a fair request. Mary Helen, go ahead.
Again, this is from a non-financial mind, and I appreciate all of Eric's comments. I'm just, and I know we can't undo what has been done, but I want to be able to explain to neighbors why we didn't get the best deal, or, and I can, but the burden of this is going to fall on landowners who will be assessed accordingly. And my other question was, is you made that statement of, we need the money now. So do we have no money in the bank to spend to pay expenses for however long it would take to renegotiate this?
For general obligation bond projects, that's correct. There's no money in the bank. There's money in the bank now because we've issued this borrowing. It's closed.
So these are just for capital improvement projects, not administrative fees, those sort of things.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I do want to point out that the rate that we have is consistent with what you would get right now on a commercial taxable loan. So we're pretty close. And Mr. Molander, I hear you, and we'll obviously be working with our financial advisors and our lenders always to be looking for the best deal. So that's duly noted. But if there's
So
not an
I-
action here that the board wants to take, I think staff has relied on Piper Jaffrey, who is widely respected across the state and the region for issuing these. We relied on
Input.
outside counsel, and they gave us what we think is the best advice we could get. And we think we've done a reasonable job here, and we're going to be looking to manage these costs going forward. And Mr. Molander, I appreciate your concerns, and we'll definitely follow up with our lenders.
I had one other question to ask. You mentioned Carol Samuels. She's the person that did, I think, what, 2 years ago, a year ago, the presentation on bonds and our ability to be able to sell those bonds?
She
Yes.
presented to you once. I don't remember exactly when. Yeah.
No, I don't have the capability to look right now, and that's why I asked. And Lori asserted that Carol Samuel had helped, and I'll go back and look at the document of what she said and the ability to get bond funding.
Terrific.
Mary Helen.
Let us know if you need help finding that. Okay.
Thanks for the update. Yeah, good comments, questions. We're not asking for any board action at this time, but is there any other questions, any other comments?
I have one, Steve, and sorry, I cannot find the hand raise function.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Thanks. I just want to, some things I heard in this meeting were, I heard from the staff report that we got the best possible rate and also the best possible terms, which I think is great. And that our staff had worked with consultants about the change in rate and that this was the best thing we could get for now. And then I have also heard sort of a propagation of, oh, this isn't a great rate. Oh, how didn't we get the best rate and that kind of thing. So I just want to be clear as we move on to the next topic, that could be a subjective opinion about best rate but there is a staff report reporting on what our consultants said. So I just want to be really clear so we don't sort of, well, I heard from the staff that we got the best rate. And I feel like that's a good message to the public unless somehow proven otherwise. And I think as board members, we should be mindful of how we represent our organization's work to the public.
Thanks, Nancy. Mary Helen?
Sorry, I just want to comment because Nancy and I have talked about this issue before. I don't think it's bad that we hear other opinions. And I think we need to be able to be collaborative because other opinions matter. And many of the people that are on this call have not heard me say the example of Nick Fish is that you want to hear the whole story and you want to hear from the people that don't agree with you so that you can be able to see the whole story and be able to respond. So I believe it's good to hear different opinions. It doesn't mean we have to agree with them. It doesn't mean we have to agree with anyone. And it's just the idea of being able to get many opinions. We might all roll our eyes at that, but I think that it's to our benefit to be able to hear opinions because otherwise all we're doing is agreeing with whatever staff says. And I think we've had very good service and staff has worked very hard to get the best opinions. But I believe that we need to be open-minded and collaborative in accepting opinions that are diverse from us because everyone that's ever been involved in government hearings, testimonies, city council, somebody will always stand up and say you're crazy. And Nick Fish liked those moments because he wanted to know why somebody thought he was crazy. So I appreciate Eric's comments, and I think that we should give him the respect of being able to have a comment. We're not being asked to vote on Eric's version or do anything else, but I want to hold us to a higher standard of being able to accept diverse opinions, even though we may or may not agree with them.
Thanks, Mary Helen. Let's move on. The next topic we have on our agenda is the financial presentation starting on page 31 of your board packet. Lori, you're up again.
Lori's looking frozen, or is it me?
Yeah, I think she's frozen.
Looks like she left and may be coming back.
Unfortunately, she's got the next, she's got this one in the next item on the agenda, but let's see if there's something we can jump to and come back. Nope.
She's
Mr. Chair,
left
we
and she's gonna try and come back in, it looks like.
could potentially shift to the audit, but it might be useful for the board to hear the financials first. Regrets for our technical challenges.
Just a quick minute. She should be in soon.
Thank you for your patience, everyone.
We could take a quick 3-minute bio break if we need it.
Mr. Chair, while we're waiting, I was thinking a little bit about the potential of having these candidates introduce themselves, and it dawned on me, and maybe Allison should opine, with all due respect to our friends who are here. Not everyone is here, and so I worry a little bit about the implications and equity of that. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I just wanted, as my brain is running in the background, that occurs to me, and Wendy helped me see that as well. So thank you, Wendy, for thinking about it.
Were all candidates invited?
They were all invited. So just a thought to try and keep things square or round or whatever the appropriate shape might be.
This is Allison. I think that since they were all invited, you're not violating any ethics rules. If you do have folks introduce themselves, that said, you'll want to make sure that you give other folks who didn't come an opportunity to introduce themselves at a future meeting. I think it's more of what the board feels is fair and whether there's time today rather than a legal or ethical problem.
Thank you, Allison. I did just get a text from Lori, and her Wi-Fi is down. I've asked her if she can join by phone. I wonder, with the permission of the board, if we might be well served going to the audit, but I don't want to shortcut or in any way prevent the board from having the financial information before that. But I would point out that the current financial information is current and the audits are past. So while there's a relationship there, that may be a good use of this board's time. But again, just trying to make use of all y'all being here.
Wendy?
Oh, I just wanted to say that some of the candidates have day jobs and they were not able to join this meeting.
I want to add that I organized a candidates forum for North Portland, North and Northeast Portland, and an all candidate, and we had to follow regulations. They were all invited, and if they could not attend, they could submit written testimony. That was according to advice from the city. If they're given the opportunity and choose not to attend, and Allison, there's probably some sort of legal language in here that I'm not using, but they were afforded the opportunity to participate in, for whatever reason, they chose not to. One person was in a car accident coming to the meeting. So I think that if that time allows itself and they just say, hi, I'm Mary Helen Kincaid and I'm running for office because, and a minute comment would be beneficial to me. So sort of like a candidates forum.
Thanks, Mary
And if
Helen.
others want to submit testimony later, they can.
Wendy?
I just want to clarify that this was advertised to all the candidates as a board meeting, and the opportunity to introduce themselves was never mentioned in any communication. So
That's a
it's
good
not.
point. Why don't we, I'll make a suggestion here. Why don't we plan for this at the next meeting and make it clear to prospective board members that there will be some time on the agenda for introductions and a brief statement. And sorry for those that attended if you thought that was going to be at this meeting, but let's make sure we're being fair and equitable across the board. I know Lori's still trying to get back on. Is there with the audit, is there someone else on staff that could bring that up and begin that presentation, or?
I can give it a shot, and maybe with Angel's help, if I err, he can help.
I
correct me.
do have the presentation I could bring up as the auditor.
Okay, and I'll just introduce James Marta's here. He's been the longtime auditor for the drainage districts and the urban district for the last couple of years. I guess a few points that I want to share with you since Lori is not here. And again, my regrets, because I will likely not be as thoughtful or thorough or accurate as Lori. But one thing I wanted to point out to you is that we've worked really hard to speed the implementation of these audits. Typically, we don't complete this work until December. And so we're really excited that we got them done early. And we think that's really beneficial to the board. And we're excited to close out the books for the legacy districts and turn our focus going forward to improving our financial transparency and supporting your oversight role. And I think with that, I just want to shout out to the finance team for their incredibly hard work. We did cancel vacations around the end of the fiscal year. Nobody was allowed to take leave so that we could get this done. I also want to shout out to the rest of the staff who had to get all of their invoices in. And really support the finance team in completing the audit. And, Karen and Angel and Katie and basically the whole crew has worked really hard. And I just want to say that I saw it and I appreciate it. And I think with that, we can turn it over to Mr. Marta, unless there are questions for me. And hopefully, Lori said Zoom won't let her in on her phone. She's restarting her router and her computer. So she is working diligently to try and come back.
Well, with that, I will go ahead and go over the audits. And I do really want to copy, what Jim has said. This was a really planned out process. It really started, it's been going on for years, but when Lori came on, she did some back work and had been going back into the records of some of these to make sure all the assets were correct. She's eliminated assets over the years. She's recast some of them. So got a much cleaner picture through last year and then in this year, so that this close will be good. We really planned this from the spring going through this to get all these audits done. And yes, it was a lot of work. We have 6 audits here. We are going to we've issued 5 of them. The multnomah one we haven't issued yet. They were waiting for one. It's called OPEB. It's a benefits adjustment. We got that, but we haven't issued the audit on that. The adjustment to the financial statements that you're going to see is $7,913. We knew it wasn't going to be material, but we just wanted to be the correct because we know this is a closeout. So first of all, we need to let you know with the communications to you as a board. These are the audits that we had conducted, and we have to emphasize that the financial statements are the responsibilities of management. So a lot of times people look at the audit and they go, this whole thing's the audit report, but really just the letter on the front is the auditor's report. Our responsibility is to issue an opinion on the financial statement, and we have issued it unmodified. So that's the best auditors give. We look to see if they have any other consultants and experts and such, and the only ones that they've used and related to this would be the actuaries that are related to the pension liabilities and the OPEB. The significant accounting policies, as I said, the biggest estimates in forming these financial statements are the pension and the OPEB, and then the collectability of the receivables. So those are the biggest estimates associated with these financial statements. An audit is more than just telling you that the numbers are correct. We look at the systems, we look at the policies and procedures, we test those controls, we look at approval processes, we gather other evidence and detail on the accounts, and review the accounting methods and reporting. So the scope has been completed as planned, except the Multnomah one. We just got the final information. We should be issuing it within the next week. So the audit results, as I said, we're issuing unmodified opinion. What you have before you is the draft report for the Multnomah Drainage District. But as I said, the difference is only $7,913. It has to relate to an actuary report we got for the OPEB. So it's definitely not material to the financial statements. The key report components is when you look at these reports, you might not be financial folks, but you know, the management discussion analysis that the staff prepare is really good to give you highlights of what happened during the year. Sometimes the financial position might look like it goes up a lot one year and down, and that could be timing when you get bond funding and then the next year you spend the money. So reading those highlights is really important to help you understand what's happening in the financial statements. Where there's condensed financial statements in there, there's analysis and other facts and conditions. So it's a good place for you to start reading and understanding the financials. So so any audit like this is really a critical look at the organizations. And so we actually issue 2 critical letters at the back. One is a report on internal control and compliance. And those are letters at the back. And that's where you would find if there were any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, the auditor would have to specifically call those out. We had none. So that's good. And then we're also have to issue a letter in compliance with the fiscal affairs requirements required by the Oregon Auditor's Office. And those are on the pages indicated, and we did not have any issues there. So both from a compliance standpoint, good audits. So the financial results. So these are as of June 30th. Some of the entities, of course, as of July 1, they're transferring assets. But this is the perspective of what we've audited. And as I said, you know, you'll see that the urban flood and safety, they have a loss, and that's just because they don't have the revenue stream, and that's going to be corrected through the formation of all these together. And so that's why that they're showing a deficit in net position because they did not have that revenue stream, but they did have borrowing. And most of that was through loans through the city of Portland and others. MCCD has operating income of $1.5 million and net increase of $1.9 million, and the net position, it says here, $12.5 million, but that's adjusted down by $7,913. Penn 1, net operating income of $1.3 million. Increase in net position, and so their net position is $3.4 million. Now, when an auditor says net position, and we say 12 million or 3 million, it doesn't mean that's money to spend, because most of that money is typically invested in your capital improvements, and which we'll show graphically later. So this doesn't mean cash to spend necessarily, because those might be invested in capital assets. Then going on to Penn 2. They had net operating income of $4,000, so pretty much a break even. But then because of other non-operating transfers and such, they had a $197,000 net increase, so their net position is $6.9 million. Sandy Development, operating income of $1.1 million, increase in net position of 1.3. That's because of non-operating items. Total net assets of $5.3 million. And the JCA, net operating income of $227,000, a decrease in net position. That's because they had other certain transfers out, and so they transferred everything out at the end of the year. So the net position at the end of the year is 0. So that one actually had transferred everything by June 30th. So this is kind of a graph over time, and it's good to look at financial data and other data over time. And this shows how your assets have been increasing, but also the liabilities, that's the debt, and the net position has increased. So what this is including is really going to be mostly capital assets. And so you see, as you put projects into place, your capital assets increase. And so those assets are considered part of your net position, but they're not really spendable. It's just assets that are sitting out there. Going over to Pen 1, this you could see that they had big projects between 2023 and 24, and that's why the total assets have increased. But what's really nice about this program is you see the liabilities have been relatively stable. So they had resources that came in to spend these and that were spent on projects. And as you can see, the capital assets increase. Now, not all of those are assets that are completed. There's a big part that are just work in process at this time. So those are not depreciated as of yet. And then Pen 2, very similar. So I look at these and that really represents strong programs because they are receiving the funding to do these projects. And so the liabilities didn't increase appreciably. But you did have the additions of the projects, and you can see the project increase here. And so this is two components, is the work in process and depreciable assets. So eventually those will be put into place. But you do see some little bit of different stuff happening here on this graph. And remember early in the discussion, I said, Lori, when she came on, she went back into the records and researched things in detail. And one of the things that she had found is she found that some things that were classified in the past history as more of land improvement, she looked at the history and found that these were more depreciable improvements in the levy. And so that's why you'll see the land went away and it went here. So it wasn't that you lost land, it just got changed the category into this depreciable levies. And so then they've depreciated that. So that was a little bit of change in treatment of those items. Then the Sandy development, once again, it's very similar to Pen 1 and 2, where the resources coming in have been funding these projects and that the liabilities are quite minimal. So really in a good financial position. And you can see the capital assets here. Most of it work in process has increased, but when those get completed, those will get stacked in there. And then finally, the JCA, you have their total assets and liabilities are zeroed out because all those have been transferred over. So that's why you have a closeout, so you're not going to see this anymore. And then the urban flood, you do see that it has the net assets of negative, and that's because it really didn't have the funding to carry on the operations, and so you've been doing borrowing. So borrowing doesn't create net position, it creates debt. And so that's why you have debt increasing and net assets going negative position. So the audit results really are good. You have unqualified opinions. You close the books in record time, and I really appreciate the team. They were really, really hardworking. They're very responsive. As I said, we have formally issued 5 of them. The other ones in draft that you have, we have just a minor change. So there's no modifications and no deficiencies identified. And overall, there's been a growth in a lot of the programs on the net assets. Based on that, are there any questions?
Thank you, James. Let's go to Eric.
So James, let's go back to the Pen 2 records, and in particular, I'm going to need to take some pretty detailed notes on that change in accounting policy associated with the levies. In the year ended June 30th, 2023, our depreciation expense was only $73,857. And for the current year, because of an accounting policy change, the depreciation expense is now $921,676. So talk me through what exactly happened there.
And I will say it shortly, and if Lori's on, I'll let her take it from there. But you could see the land right here, and it's just almost about, between $800,000 and $900,000. So when Lori went back in the records, she determined that although they've been carried as land, she looked at what the treatment and what made up those assets. So I think she went in historical records, stuff that we never had a chance to look at. She found
So
that
this is really just taking improvements to the levee that we had at some point as land, and now you are in a single year writing off that asset. Is that correct?
Yes.
No, that's not correct. So,
Well,
when
so
we
which
were-
of you is right?
When we were looking at the districts and the consolidation, one of the things that we identified with Penn 2 was that the levy assets were not classified the same in Penn 2 as they were all of the other districts. So we started digging into those records, and what we found was in 1955, these levy assets were, these improvements to the levy occurred. And back in the day, they made the decision to treat those as land. That is not consistent with the classification of the rest of the district. The rest of the district treats those levy improvements as levy improvements, which are depreciable assets. So the depreciation true up that we booked in this reclassification was to catch up the depreciation of those assets. So they depreciate over like 100-year period. So it did end up taking about half of that value, which then made the valuation of these assets, which are similar to the other districts, treated consistently across the board. So that when we did the consolidation of the districts, we didn't have inconsistent treatment of valuation and accounting practice for those similar assets. So it really was an opportunity to align the accounting between all of the districts so that we wouldn't have inconsistency. So it was a catch up of the depreciation of those assets.
Okay, so these were assets that were acquired in 1955, so 69 years ago.
Yep.
It's depreciable over 100 years.
Right. So
you've written off. Go ahead.
We did the catch up of the depreciation to get them valued consistently with the other districts.
Right, but if it's depreciable over 100 years, there should be 30 years worth of life left on it.
Yes, there is. We didn't fully write them off.
But the land is valued at 0.
Right, because the land moved to a depreciable levy asset. There isn't land.
I'm looking at your numbers.
It's why the green bar went up, right?
Correct.
I'm not a financial guy, but I noticed the green bar went there, so I need some credit for that.
That's the purpose of the bars.
Credit given. Right, and so Lori, one of the things that I'm pleased that you found that there was an inconsistency in how these assets were booked from 70 years ago, and I think I now understand it. I do realize that this is just a non-cash expense, so it's really just an accounting policy change, or what you might consider an accounting policy true-up to the other districts. But you know, it would have been nice to have known about this beforehand. So as a former president of Penn 2, just give me a heads up, please.
Yes, we identified this issue in August.
Thanks. I know this is a very interesting discussion for the financial folks in the room, but let's wrap it up and move on. I know a lot of us are kind of lost in some of that. Seth?
Yeah, I just had a quick question on, you mentioned the recurring operating loss for flood safety and described in note 3. When was the first year that this showed up on the audit? Was that 2022?
2019, the first year of the entity. So every time you borrow money and don't have operating income, on a GAAP basis, not on a budget basis, but on a GAAP basis, you're going to have a loss. And so it accumulates.
I'm just wondering when the first time it showed up in the report on the audit of financial statements from the auditor.
I believe we started the borrowing in 2020. So the entity itself started in 2019. There was just a little bit of activity in that year. And in 2020 was when we started the borrowing from the city of Portland. So you'll see the negative fund balance is just basically just that debt.
And it says that and for the auditor, it says that any discussion included is the management's. Did you guys take a look at the recurring operating losses, or is that just included to highlight what's included in the notes to the financial statement?
It's just in the notes to the financial statements. So it wasn't an operating entity. So we address the fact that it wasn't an operating entity. We do address in the MD&A and the notes, the negative fund balance.
And as the auditor, as the auditors, we had the discussion along the whole way about how is this viable? How are they doing it? What is the funding? It's part of the unified plan. So yeah, every year we had those discussions about the debt and the how is this going to be achieved in the long run.
And so kind of as a follow-up to that, if you've been having conversation, what was the reason for the debt being the recurring operating loss happening?
We had no operating revenue, and we were drawing on the City of Portland line of credit as our only source of revenue.
And I'm asking for the auditor, is that?
Oh, apologies.
Yes.
No, it's okay.
Yes.
That's the.
And really, because they were going to be, you had to get this thing all closed together before you can have all the agreements for the ongoing funding of this joint entity. And so because that hadn't been done yet, they didn't have the revenue stream.
Okay, thanks.
Mary Helen?
I just want to follow up on Seth to make sure that I understand this, or Lori or the auditor could answer. But when you use the term operating deficit, is that everything except the GO bond expense? Or so does that include increased salaries or increased staff? So that would increase salaries and where do those costs get covered? So I'm going to salaries and contractors.
So Mary Helen, you are a step ahead of us here. When we take a look at audit reports, we're looking back. So the picture that you're seeing on the screen is as of June, prior to our consolidation of all of the districts, and the activity that, had I not had internet issues, you would have seen, but you'll be seeing in a minute, in July and August. So these numbers that you're looking at right now were our initial activity in the urban district, which means we were borrowing money from the city to be able to pay for the costs that we were incurring in relation to the consolidation of the districts. What you will see starting this year is that we've transferred all of those other fund balances in from the other districts, and you will see now that we have a balanced budget and we won't be showing an operating deficit going forward. So we have a balanced budget. We have to remain within those appropriations, and we will be managing that. So if we start to get any indication that our revenue stream is not meeting the budgeted amount of resources that we anticipated coming in, then we will be coming to you as a board and saying, here are the cuts that we propose to be able to continue to have a balanced budget. So it is not our intent to operate at a deficit going forward, but this entity sitting by itself, which is how we have to look at it because it was an independent entity until June 30th. It didn't have any operating income. It didn't have any staff, and it was being charged for MCDD staff activity in order to get the district up and running. So we had enough cash to be able to do all those activities that we needed to do, but that was only because we were borrowing money. So when you look on a budget basis, that looks balanced because on a budget basis, borrowing brings resources in that then you can spend. But when you look at it from the perspective of generally accepted accounting principles, which is what you're looking at here, all of that borrowing is taking away from your fund balance. So it's not really a resource. It's a resource of cash, but on a balance sheet, it's not a resource, which is why it shows up as a negative amount. But this negative amount goes away on July 1st when we bring in all of the activity from the other districts. So I did include a balance sheet for July in your board packet of your financial statements, so you can see kind of where we're sitting now, and we do have a positive fund balance.
Thanks, Lori.
Okay, that just to make sure that I say the right words. And I saw the balance sheet. We had a deficit, and I'm trying to figure out what caused. We had no funds, so we borrowed money.
Yep.
The deficit was because it had never existed before.
Correct.
But is there, because is it because there was because there's never funds before, but that money was being used to pay for and maybe this is not a question that can be answered here, but for increased staff and contractors, which happened.
No, just all of the urban flood safety expenses were being paid out of that. As a standalone entity, the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District was paying for our activities and drawing that line of credit from Portland. So that's why we have the net,
Okay,
net
so the
liability.
MCDD increase in staff over prior years was not considered as an added expense that then carried over.
That was an expense for MCDD.
Okay.
Jason, and then let's move this on, and we're running out of time. We still have more presentations to go through here. Go ahead, Jason.
I just wanted to say that in my brief time on this board, I've heard a lot of trepidation from a lot of members of the board about the financials. There's been quite a bit of angst about it over time. And, I think when I read through the auditor's reports and looked at the financials and just heard the presentation, the one thing that I'm seeing is that people seem to think that the books are in good shape, that things have been done well, and that we have reached the point where we've closed things out and we have we've kind of threaded the needle on a pretty difficult process of consolidation. And I think that the board probably should be thanking the staff and Lori in particular for making that happen. So thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Comment, Jason. Thank you very much, and I'll echo that. Are we ready for your next presentation, which I think will help kind of answer some of the questions and a little bit of the confusion? Nancy?
So this is Nancy. I think on this agenda item, aren't we supposed to approve the audited financial statements?
There is a request for the board to consider accepting the financial statements. There's been a little bit of confusion about what that means. It doesn't mean that you're approving all the numbers in this statement. It really is kind of a celebratory request to me. By accepting the financials and acknowledging the positive results, you are kind of giving a pat on the back to my finance team who unfortunately, this year I asked them not to take vacations for the end of June and the entire month of July. So I feel like kind of a heavy, but they did do a lot of excellent work to be able to get us here. So it's not putting any burden on you to say that you think this is right or wrong, but really accepting those statements is just saying, hey, thanks, finance team. We really appreciate you. So if you choose not to do that, I know there's been some concern by board members that they didn't want to take an action on this. If you choose not to, it's okay. We're still moving forward. We're filing these with the state, and everything is going to be closed out just like we need to within a timely manner. But I really see it as an opportunity to collaborate with my board members and to thank my team because they do work really hard. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Lori. And there is there's motion language in the chat that Wendy just put in to accept the audited financial statements. Are we ready for a motion? Kenny?
I just had one request. Could we also send these out to the legacy board members, since this is a period when they were responsible for these financials?
Absolutely. You and I talked about that earlier, and I said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. The ones that are complete are posted out on our website right now, and we'll make sure to send out a link to all of those board members so they're able to get to those reports and see how things ended up. Thanks for the idea.
That'd be great.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Eric?
And James, is it possible for us to note the change in accounting policy associated with the land value of the levy? It's pretty material. It's over $1 million. It's close to $1 million. And I think that if you just put in language in there that says that there was an accounting policy change associated with those assets, it will be important.
Don't we have something already in the MD&A that is discussing that? It's
We do.
yeah, it's already in there.
Okay, and what page is that on? I mean, it was a, Lori, do you remember?
I don't have the reports in front of me. I apologize. We could take this
So
off
I'm-
if you'd like, and I can.
Yeah, so Lori, just when we send it out to the other board members for Penn 2, what we want to do is let them know that this extraordinary change in depreciation expense is associated with a true up of the accounting policies to the other units so that they were consistent and what that impact was. And because of the value of it, these are people that were expecting us to have a much more positive net income, but it's an accounting change. It's non-cash, so I'm not particularly concerned about it, but we do need to document that for both our current board members as well as members of the former Penn 2.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Nancy?
Okay, I move to accept the fiscal year 23-24 audited financial statements as presented.
Thank you, Nancy.
Second.
From Spain. And we have a second from Emerald to do the same. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Lori. And
Thank you.
thank you, James.
I'm going to jump right in now. I apologize for my internet issues. Let me bring my slides up. Hopefully we will make it through without any more problems. Thank you, Comcast. Okay, so here we are. We have the general fund spending results by budget appropriation line. These lines are the appropriation amounts that we are required to stay within in order to comply with Oregon local budget law. First, you'll see the total annual budget by appropriation line. Then we've allocated the budget by month this year, which is a first time activity for us. So we may see some variations. We'll have to learn this year whether we did those allocations in a way that reflects our operations. But this is really to support your review of spending levels on a monthly basis. So this column shows the monthly budget allocated for July. This column shows the actual spending for the month of July. And then this column shows you your variance for July. There are positive variances for the month on every appropriation line. This isn't unusual for July, particularly since this is the first year of our consolidated operations, but also you do a lot of work to get all of the activity into June that was related to June. So July tends to be a little bit light on expenses normally. For the executive director, all of the spending in July reflects personnel costs. So the positive variance is related to materials and services costs that were budgeted in this division, including education, travel, and equity consulting services. This is a timing difference. The positive variance in legal reflects the timing of the legal billings received for processing and the positive variance due to an open position in this division. Finance and administration includes our administration, IT, financial services, board services, and human resources departments. The positive variance results from 1.6 FTEs in open positions and timing differences for materials and services spending. Planning and Public Affairs also has an open position, resulting in a positive variance for the month. And this division is also experiencing those timing differences for materials and services. Engineering and Operations has a 0.6 FTE in open position, which is actually 2 full positions, one in engineering and one in operations, but it's offset by our summer help in operations and some intern hours that were worked in engineering. These temporary positions are included in the budget, but when I look month to month, you're going to see kind of those awkward variations. But as we get towards the end of the year, you'll start to see things line up a little bit better. We're seeing timing differences in materials and services expense for this division as well. For general fund debt service, there were no debt service payments due in July, so there's no monthly budget and no actuals. And in capital projects in July, we had significant activity on the 13th Avenue Pike project and the Gate Tower project. We have about $4,000 worth of labor spending on the general obligation bond projects in July. We're currently working to develop those reports related to the GEO Bond Fund. So we'll be providing you with some better information, hopefully by September. We have pretty limited activity in July and August. It'll just be staffing costs because we didn't have any funds to spend until we hit September for that fund. And then this final column just calculates the percent of the annual budget that's been spent so far in July. Okay, let's move on. We've completed the closeout of the legacy districts, as you've heard, and we've transferred the balances to the urban district. This chart shows the budget basis fund balance transfer amounts. So if you try to look at the fund balances that were shown in the audit report, this is going to look different. This is budget basis for each legacy district compared to the amount that was budgeted. So we wanted to be able to compare apples to apples. The budget basis fund balance is a short-term balance sheet value, which is reflective of dollars available for current operations. MCDD's transfer is 64% of the total transferred, and at $8.2 million was a little over $1 million higher than budgeted. This number isn't reflective of that $7,900 worth of expense that we got on the OPEB actuary report, but it doesn't really change these numbers significantly. So I think that's still reflective of where we're at. Penn 1 transferred about 4%, or just under $500,000, which exceeded budget by just under $200,000. Penn 2 transferred 14%, or $1.8 million, which was less than budget by about $113,000. That had to do with spending. That didn't have to do with that kind of accounting adjustment. We had a little more capital spending than what was anticipated. SDIC transferred 18% at $2.2 million, which was more than budget by $317,000. So in total, we had budgeted an $11.4 million transfer in from our legacy districts, and we ended up at 12.9. So we did a little bit better than budget, which is what I was hoping for. You don't want to ever end up less than budget when you're talking resources. This slide shows our cash transfers that occurred on July 1 from each of the legacy districts. We have been able to close out all of the cash accounts, all of our outstanding checks cleared, which was a momentous occasion for us. We were very happy to get all of those legacy district accounts closed out. As a reminder, the MCDD cash transfer is unrestricted, so that funds our regular operations for the urban district starting in July. The Penn 1, Penn 2, and SDIC transfers are designated for spending in their respective legacy district boundary areas, and they're being managed in a separate account. Your board report summarizes the portion of those funds that were drawn in July, with most of the spending covering accounts payable invoices for the districts that were related to June operations. The Penn 2 funds were also drawn to cover construction invoices for the 13th Avenue Pike project. We've had a little bit of a delay in the grant funding for the 13th Avenue Pike project. We will, when we're able to draw those grant funds, those will come back in and replenish the designated funds for Pen 2. But right now we are using general fund dollars that come from Pen 2 to cover the costs as we're continuing that construction. So when we get everything kind of resolved with the state and start to draw on those grant funds again, we'll be able to replenish that fund. Each designated balance was also increased for interest earnings in the month of July. So you'll see some ups and downs in those balances as we work through those spending drawdowns. And then this shows you the fixed assets that ended up being transferred for each district, net of depreciation. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. You'll notice in your board report that the financials look different now than they did in the past. This is just a work in progress. If there's information that you feel like is missing, or information that you'd like to see, please reach out to Steve and Jim and we can work on updating those reports. I'm hoping that it's providing you the information that you're looking for, but certainly if you have feedback or looking for something different, please let me know. We're also planning on doing some strategy sessions with our new board when they come in to talk about what information needs they have and how they'd like to see this financial information presented. I am going to try and present financials on a monthly basis. Hopefully won't have the internet issues that we had today. So if you have any feedback or are looking for information, just let me know.
Thank you, Lori. Any questions for Lori? That was very helpful. You know, not being a financial person myself, you know, I have vastly different ways of looking at this stuff and that, you know, information needs in a way that's going to resonate with my brain. So glad to hear you're going to work with the new board when they come on to figure out kind of what their needs are. And I know that, you know, any kind of misunderstanding around roles, responsibilities can just lead to maybe what Jason was referring to earlier, a little bit of feeling like some members of the board were scrutinizing, going too far in details, and to some members of the board, you know, that have more of a background, they maybe don't think we're going far enough. But just hope that you can start off with the new board members and set that foundation with them and have a nice, healthy relationship with regard to data. Mary Helen.
Just want to say thank you because Lori's always gone out of her way to help me because she understands that I don't understand the technical language. So I really appreciate that and the hard work that she puts into it, late hours, emails, and I don't ask the same kind of questions that Eric and other financial people are capable. I'm like you, Steve, but I think you probably have a little bit more knowledge than I do. I in no way intended any of my remarks to say anything other than trying to clarify so that I would not say a wrong thing, that I would not be misrepresentative. And I am not the brightest bulb of the bump, and I don't intend to be. And so any indication or assertion that my questions are any more than trying to figure out what I understand, I don't think it is wrongly said. Because I've always tried for collaboration to try to get all sides of the story. And you heard my Nick Fish story. I'll tell it 100 times a day if I have to, because I really appreciate hearing from people that don't agree with me. And I think that we all should. We should learn from the questions that other people ask. And like I said, whether we agree with them or not, it's very important that we hear those. Everybody doesn't need to agree with me and everybody doesn't need to agree with Jim or Lori or anything, because that's how you do a really good job, is include all voices. And I think that goes into the equity as well. So that's my preaching for the day.
Thanks, Mary Helen. Okay, we are on the last item of our agenda. This is just an update on some board member financial and budget proposals that from June. I'll just kick that off and mention that Jim and I and Seth Reeser have been kind of talking, meeting a little bit to go over the proposal that Seth had mentioned, I think, in the last meeting. I was gone at the last board meeting, so I was catching up a little bit, but having to do with clarifying kind of a little bit about what we've been talking about today, board roles versus staff roles, information regarding financial stuff, recommendations for the next board. Yeah, and I know Seth had kind of put a motion out at the last meeting and then taken it off the table. So I just want to give him an opportunity to talk a little bit about that, and Jim, you too, and then we can open it up. I think we're not asking for any kind of action from the board today. This is really just informational and about some information you may see in the next board meeting. But yeah, Seth, go ahead, or Jim.
I just would start by saying I want to acknowledge my appreciation because Seth has put a lot of time into this, and he's also been listening to me, and we've been going back and forth and learning from each other and trying to understand how we can serve both the board and the community. So Seth, I just want to appreciate your willingness to engage and have a conversation and try and improve our financial accountability and transparency. And I think we're going to get there. So I know several board members had wondered what had happened. And so this was important both to Seth and me that we come back and let you know that we haven't dropped it. And again, I think Seth is working hard to try and balance a variety of different interests and listen to staff as he's helping improve our financial performance. So with that, I would just acknowledge Seth's role in that and Steve's help and look forward to the ongoing conversation.
Yeah, and I would like to acknowledge, I think Jason noted that there's been some financial angst or frustration, I think, on both sides or amongst some board members. I know for me that's been true, and I understand entirely that. I appreciate the work that Jim and Lori have done coming into an organization that needed to be modernized and brought up to speed. At the same time, the board was having to wrestle with some pretty important questions on what's a sustainable level of funding, what are we actually funding now, what should we be funding in the future, and that some of the data that was needed to make those decisions might not have been readily available. I think I'll start out by just kind of mentioning the proposed budget amendment I sent out had a lot of information, and I've had some time to think about it. And I think I've tried to approach this from the point of view of what we've covered some ground as a board and trying to come up with the relationships and what working with staff to establish some norms. And I think that I would like to memorialize some of that so that when the new members come on, there's more clarification around what the role of the board is in providing financial oversight, and kind of how give staff some guidance and bookends of what is expected. Because up until this point, and I've already acknowledged this, and doing it as a budget amendment probably isn't the right way of doing it. I would have liked to brought some of this stuff up as part of a budget committee or as part of a board goal program. Most of the cities I've worked for have an annual council work plan or action plan where it's clearly communicated to staff what the expectations are of the board, and they have deliverables and responsible persons assigned. That's never really happened for the legacy districts or for urban flood safety. We go through and do a board retreat every year where we get the start of our budget process is kind of a strategic planning exercise of what do we want to focus on this year. And again, I can't imagine having done that last spring in the midst of the bond campaign and the legislative session where we're trying to get some stuff done. But so recognizing that reality is something that needs to be done by the new board. And I think that some of the difficulties that I've been experiencing have been, getting information that is standard for a lot of organizations that's usually included in the audit or the budget, because, I know City of Portland, City of Troutdale, Port of Portland, go after the audit award and the budget award where there's certain supplementary schedules that are required to be included that show past history of FTE counts. salary schedules, personnel expenditures that have not been readily available to us as a board. So I've come up with a list of 7 or 8 things that I think all tie back to some sort of best practice or industry standard for financial reporting, long-term financial planning, budgeting, personnel. And Steve's been gracious enough to run that list by some of the Gresham Financial folks and some other professional organizations to make sure that they're reasonable. But I also know that I'm not the only one that has opinions on these issues about what information should be included and kind of how the communication should look. And so what Steve and I talked about was sending that memorandum around and seeing if there's other ideas that should be considered or added as part of a board discussion. And that way we can, as a board, say, here's kind of what we think the operating procedures should be to ensure that we don't get to a point where it feels like there's a lot of combativeness or conflict between the board and staff on financial issues. And that way the new board members don't have to necessarily wrestle through that, re-hoe ground that we've already covered. So I wanted to kind of open it up and see if there's anyone who had some particular areas that they'd like some additional clarification or communication standards between staff and the board on financial matters. And then I was going to have Steve, as Steve had said, would send out that copy of that memo for people to look at and discuss how to best implement that. And I also don't know what the best way of implementing that is. It could be passing a resolution. I know that we have a lot of these things embedded in our charter or bylaws that are just part of our normal operating procedure of what information we share with the board when, so that they have confidence that we are being transparent and giving them the information they need to make decisions. I don't know if a resolution is the best manner. I don't know if incorporating into the bylaws. I don't know if incorporating it into a work plan for the new temporary board or strategic planning process. I think that's kind of indeterminate at this point, and I'm also not going to impose something on staff that they're unwilling to do, and would like to hear back from staff what the best way is for them to take that and operationalize it, because I want to be clear, I'm not, and I want to make sure that the board is focused on policy and that the staff is focused on execution. The unfortunate thing is a lot of times there's a gray area in between on what falls into policy and what doesn't. And I think clarifying that gray area for the new board, based on our experience with going through this process, would help set them up for success and not have to have as many growing pains. I'm sure that there's going to be other growing pains, but not the ones that we've already experienced. So I'll wrap up with that and just kind of open it up to see if there's anyone who has any comments or questions, has a particular area of focus that they would like to see something, like a conversation like that happen at our next meeting. So I'll turn it back over to you, Chair.
Appreciate that. I know we have a lot of financial kind of experts on this board, and I don't normally call people out, but I kind of like to hear from Eric Mueller. Sorry, Eric, if you don't want to say anything, that's fine. Bob's got his hand up. We'll go to Bob.
Yeah, I appreciate the thoughts, Seth. I guess my question is, this is going to be a new board, a different board, different construction. And is this really something that's going to be useful for us to do, or is this really something that the new board is going to have to find its own place in space, its own relationship with the district, and is really for them to do? I just question whether it makes sense for us to be trying to set things up, given how much change is about to occur and the dynamic that's going to have to be developed regardless.
Yeah, and that's a fair question. I would say that, and that's why I want to say that a lot of what I'm doing is referring back to things like best practices. So applying for the Annual Comprehensive Financial Reporting Award, applying for a Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, which requires an additional level of information presented in a way that's digestible to board members and the public. I think, you know, you can even go farther and require having like a PAFR, which is a public audit, a kind of a 2-page summary of the financials. One of the things that came out of this process was, I think, having worked for a number of years in organizations that only report to TSCC versus having a budget committee, I think there's a lot of value in having a budget committee or something like that, where you have to spend some time not just talking in finance language, but making things easily digestible for people who aren't finance people, and how you present it and how you communicate in a way that's succinct and not overwhelming has a lot of value and would well serve the new board. And I'm not wanting to tell them what they should or shouldn't do on their strategic planning process, but you know, Jim pointed out that some of these awards you can't do unless you have a strategic planning process already in place, and that's not currently funded in this budget. And that's something where I would consider appropriating some of the contingency that we have to make sure that that effort happens in the spring, so that some of that effort.
We do plan to do strategic planning. We were going to do it with the next board.
Yes, with the next board.
We have plans that we're working on to do that. So it's not a lack of resource. It is my decision was to work with the new board. And if I've erred in that, I'm learning and happy to listen to y'all too.
No, and that's where, you know, some of this is not going to be making, you know, the things that I've been focusing on are things that most organizations do anyway. And we just haven't had the history of having them been done by the legacy districts or in our first year as flood safety that seem to make a lot of sense, and I hope won't be too controversial in terms of meeting best practices. You know, if there's organizations that have best practices and pay compensation in budgeting, in finance, not trying to recreate the wheel, just trying to refer to the experts and the organizations that set what the best practices are in financial transparency and accountability, and kind of asking myself, if we say we want to be financially accountable and transparent, but don't follow the best practices, can we say that we're doing that?
Thanks, Seth. Any questions for Seth, Jim, others? I know you don't have a document in front of you. It's a little bit amorphous, maybe of a discussion.
Well, I think we're committed to coming back to you with more of a work session format, or again, to engage you in this discussion. And I do think it will be beneficial for you to do that. And we'll provide some great feedback for the next board. So, and if you guys want to make some policy now, that's clearly your purview. So I think the other thing we're looking forward to chatting with you all about is, as we're starting to plan the onboarding for the new members, you all have been through all of this and have a really good insight into what board members should know. So we'd like to work with you to get your advice on the onboarding work that we're going to do and how we should do that. We started to contemplate whether we want to have a joint meeting or maybe even some executive sessions where you can share performance issues about me with the new board. So we're thinking through all of that to make sure you guys have an opportunity to share your experience and expertise with that new board. And we would welcome your participation in framing that out as we're working on it. And I think Seth's doing a good job trying to figure out the best way to try and do that. And I appreciate his collaboration on it.
Jim, Mary Helen.
I just want to commend Seth for all the work and effort that he's put into this, because it's, I think, something that we've danced around for a number of times because everybody thinks something else. And I've been one that said, well, I've been on other boards. Well, this is not another board, and this is an unusual situation and a first only. And I think the discussions that we can have to make it for our predecessors or successors will be very valuable. And it's things like saying, we are working on this. I always think in my head, who's we? Statements like oversee financial policy. Well, what oversee means different things to say Jim or to me or to any other board member. the in-depth part of that is, I don't know that you could ever define it, but Seth did a very good job of saying about what other entities have done. And if I think one of the best practices that any board member or any staff member coming into position is not to forget the history. I'm involved in historic preservation. So if we just said there is no history, but we're going to make it now, or we're going to write it now, or we're going to say it now, you do a disservice to the historical work that's been done. And, you know, Lori, going back to 1955, it's amazing that she took the time to do that. But it adds enlightenment to how we can move forward from here because of the history. So I commend all the people, that whoever were the we that worked on this, for bringing this. And Jim, I really like your idea of discussing it at a board meeting after we get Seth's memo of the kinds of things that he would recommend, because you can't know everything. And Albert Einstein says you don't have to know all the answers, you just have to know who does. And I think this is a perfect example of that.
Thanks, Mary Helen. Jason?
I just, I think moving forward, having some sense of some ideas for the staff to be able to communicate with the future board sounds like a great idea. And it seems like a smart way, at least, to have a template that they can begin with. But I agree with Bob that setting any kind of policy for the new board, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense, because that really should be their responsibility. And then on a different note, I guess one of the things I've noticed or one of the things I think was going to happen is this new board is going to come in, and in some ways it's going to be, I think it's going to be a very different board, and the legacy of the legacy districts will sort of be in the past. And I think that may make the new board's job quite a bit easier, and it may take away some of the sort of emotion and some of the investment that people on the current board have, and might make it a little bit more of a clear-eyed process, and maybe a little less baggage. And I think so. I think the new board is going to have maybe an easier time with developing policy and developing sort of best practices for communicating with staff than this board has, because there's so much history with this existing board. Except for me, I have no history here.
Thanks, Jason. Eric?
Yeah, Steve, you had mentioned earlier, and I guess as I've listened to the folks, Seth and I had chatted about some of this off and on different points over the last couple of months. And you know, I agree with a lot of what people have said. I tend to think this kind of middle path might be a better one that Jason had mentioned, and Bob, is that we may want to talk about some of this stuff. And I'm thinking we may want to come up with some, rather than setting policy and adopting policy with a resolution or whatever, but we may want to come up with a recommendation for the subsequent board to consider. You know, based on what we worked through, we suggest you consider these. And then, of course, as has been mentioned, that new board, those new individuals are going to have their own needs and opinions about what they want. I guess the other piece that I was thinking about as I was listening to the comments is that it's going to be a matter of, you know, what degree of detail, you know, what level does the board fly at? Does it fly at 30,000 feet above the operation overseeing things, or does it fly at 5,000 feet, or does it fly at 500 feet? And I think that's going to be part of the challenge of figuring out what that information, that degree of information that needs to be prepared. And I guess the other piece I'm a little hesitant over in terms of the best practices is I think that they tend to have to scale based on the size of the organization. I think the degree of information that, you know, a Portland city councilor may need to be briefed on versus, you know, a much smaller city out in East County needs to be briefed on is that they're at different levels. And so exactly figuring out how to translate some of those maybe more general best practices suggestions from GFOA or from other folks, we may have to massage that a little bit. And then also sort of the nature of the entities. I mean, my familiarity is with municipalities and cities. Special districts are a little bit different of an animal. And so I'm not certain. There's a lot that's going to be transferable, but you know, there's probably some uniquenesses that need to be accounted for. So I guess I'm just a little bit hesitant about the degree of detail that we may decide to try and specify at least before January. Anyway, that's, since you wanted my comments, there you go.
Thanks, Eric. I knew there was a good reason why I called you out. Nancy.
Thank you. So I've heard that there's going to be a document submitted for about this discussion asking for contributions. I've also heard that the and this is, wait, let me just continue. I also heard that perhaps our executive team would appreciate some suggestions on onboarding for the new board. So I guess I'm just trying to, as we are getting close to the end of the meeting here, sort of, I'm asking for what exactly is our homework? And I would appreciate just to sum up at near the end, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, good idea, Nancy. And I think there is some synergy between the items we think new board members would benefit from in the onboarding process with just the general information. We've all been through this, and what's helpful for us and what we think would be helpful for them. I like Eric's suggestion of some kind of middle ground of a suggestion document for the new board that isn't necessarily a resolution, but is just here's what we found useful and kind of our years of working in this space, and here's what you might want to look at for yourself. You may not want to, but it might be something that's useful for you. I don't know what the homework is exactly. I think we're going to send a memo out that has some of these ideas, and then if you can continue to think about maybe more into the onboarding piece of that, what information is vital. Staff's going to obviously come up with a great process for this, but we can help inform from our perspective maybe what would be useful. Anybody else?
I'll commit to working with Seth to try and include a version of what he's working on in your next packet. And we already have some draft onboarding planning, and so we'll convert that into a memo for your packet as well. And then in the meantime, if any of you have suggestions, I'd love to get a cup of coffee or have a phone call or whatever it might be, and then we can factor those into the material that goes into the packet in advance, or you can email me or talk amongst yourselves, and then we can discuss it at least in October and potentially in November as well, and ideally then land on wherever you guys want to land with documentation or policy changes or recommendations or interactions for the new board. If that's acceptable to you all. Again, we serve at your pleasure, of course.
If just a straw poll here, if you kind of agree with what we're discussing here at the end, give me a thumbs up. If you're wholly against it, give me a thumbs down. And I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up right now. So I think we're on the right track. And we have 2 minutes, so we're gonna wrap this up. We're not gonna go late today. Anybody have any last suggestions, comments, good of the order? All right, not seeing anything.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the conversation today.
Eric, I'm glad that you're safe after that plane crash. I worried about you.
Well, thank you. And the kind words, I was fortunate. It was about block and a half down the hill from my house. So
Wow,
Yeah,
scary.
I live at the other end at the west end, so now every time I hear a plane fly over, I think, where am I gonna go? So it brought awareness to both sides of the airport.
Thanks,
Nancy, safe
everybody.
travels. Have a great rest of your trip. Thank you for intruding into your vacation to join us today.
I thank you for that. And I was on mute, but the garbage came by. They come by at midnight every night. It's just like infrastructure is just so different everywhere. So it's fun to be on an
when you're supposed to have
infrastructure call.
dinner. Isn't that in Spain? Don't they eat really late, Nancy?
Yeah, it's definitely pretty active down the block here. So I'm gonna go see if I can get some tapas.
All right.
Well,
All
in
right,
case
we're
any of
officially
you are
adjourned.
wondering, both in the flood safety business where you want to keep water moving, and the garbage business, you need to keep that garbage moving too. You don't want it to sit around. So just a little metaphor for y'all.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We're
Bye
adjourned.
now.
Thanks.
Bye.